Gonna learn today the pons, but before going to the detail of the pons, we should learn some important relations. As you can see in the diagram, that on the very top you see the cerebral cortex, its various parts you can observe, that is the frontal cortex, the parietal, the temporal, and the insular cortex, the occipital, right? So if I turn on the inferior aspect or base of the brain, what do you see here? Let me make it a little bit enlarged view. Yeah, this portion is the midbrain, and this is the pons, which we will be studying later on. And this is the medulla oblongata, of course, continues as the spinal cord below, right? And on the both sides, posteriorly, if you observe, these are the left and right cerebellar cortex, or you would say the cerebellum lies posterior to the brainstem. That includes the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, right? So another important thing I have to tell you, that when we see this is the basal region or base or inferior portion, and now imagine that let me draw it for you. If we have got the cranial cavity here or the skull, so you should see that the area of the or surface of the pons, that is anterior or ventral, will be against the basi-occiput of the cranial cavity, you would say, right? That is why the anterior or ventral surface is called as the base of the pons, right? Okay, we can see the anterior aspect of the pons, right? And this is the pontomedullary sulcus, or the vice versa. Let me turn it laterally, and now we are able to see the middle cerebellar peduncle that is present on both sides, right? And this middle cerebellar peduncle is the gateway, you would say, that the pons communicate with that of the cerebellum posteriorly, which is being removed from here, right? Okay, if I turn it posteriorly, now you can see the structures being marked on the posterior aspect of the pons, right? And now let me make it clear that this posterior aspect from where the cerebellum is removed, and it is forming now the floor of the fourth ventricle. Reason being that as the ventral aspect of the pons is on the basal side, so forms the floor, and the roof is definitely, we will be observing, that will be formed when we place the cerebellum again on it, right? And we will discuss this later on. Now see the structure marked on the posterior aspect. This is on the very top is the superior medullary velum, and this is the superior cerebellar peduncle. That was the middle cerebellar peduncle, and of course the inferior. So these are the three peduncles you can see. And an important thing is that if we study the pons, the main peduncle is middle one, but we can see on its upper transverse section a little portion of the superior peduncle as well, and on the inferior transverse section we will observe the inferior cerebellar peduncle as well, right? Okay, now see the velum has been removed, and we can see this rhomboid shape fossa seams, that is the floor of the fourth ventricle, right? That is the interpeduncular fossa, and in the very center we observe that there is the middle sulcus, that is called as medial sulcus, right? Again I am repeating, the median sulcus is marked by the blue line. Okay, now see that on each side of the median sulcus we observe the medial eminence, and on its inferior aspect we find a protuberance, that is the facial colliculus. Okay, now there is a part that is present on the lateral aspect of the lateral sulcus called as locus ceruleus, right? Okay, let me show you the sulcus limitans that separates the facial colliculus from the lateral area. With the help of sulcus limitans, let me mark this lateral area called as vestibular area present on both sides, and we know that it has got underneath the vestibular nuclei of the 8th cranial nerve, right? Okay, now we have entered into the part of the floor of the 4th ventricle being formed by the posterior aspect of the middle oblongata, right? That is why you are seeing these structures also. The sulcus limitans is being continued downward. Here you can see and here you can see. Okay, and what are these transverse running fibers? These are medullary stria present in the 4th ventricle. Okay, and this is tinea cinerea. Now let me show you, that is the obex. Okay, and okay, now very important structure in relation to again the base of the brain, you would say. Now let me repeat, this is the temporal cortex, or in general we would say that cerebral cortex, right? Okay, now I'm taking it to the center and you can see the midbrain. This is the pons and this is the middle oblongata. Why this is important? Because we have to learn the internal structure of the pons, but before that we should know that which cranial nerves should be coming out from which level of these brainstem. So concentrate. This is almost the lateral aspect on both sides of the middle of the pons, right? So here lies the exit of the trigeminal nerve, and this dilated larger portion is the trigeminal ganglion. And if I mark it, that is making the sensory root, and if this white line you concentrate, that lies medial to the sensory root, it is the motor root. So make a rule that motor is medial, right? Okay, in this trigeminal nerve. Now concentrate at the lower edge or pontomedullary junction. We see on both sides the exit of abducens nerve, the 6th cranial nerve. Now move a little bit more laterally. You would observe the facial nerve on both sides. Let me mark it. Both sides the facial nerve, as they are bilaterally present. Just below that, that is nervus intermedius, and after that the vestibulocochlear nerve is being marked on both sides. So let me repeat that at the pontomedullary junction, from the medial to the lateral, there is the 6th cranial nerve, and now if I able to mark, that is the 7th cranial nerve and the nervus intermedius, and the 8th cranial nerve, that is vestibulocochlear. Now you know the reason that when we take the transverse sections at the lower level of the pons like this, so what we get here, we must be having on its inner side the 6th cranial nerve, the 7th cranial nerve and the 8th cranial nerve, right? And if we take a section a little bit above or at the upper pons, we will get the underneath motor nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, right? So this is the basic concept, because the inner structures are changed in the pons, so we see or observe its two transverse section on these two levels, right? And if you are interested in other nerves as well, so let me show you. That is the olfactory nerve and a tract. This is the frontal cortex, right? This is the olfactory trigon, and this is the optic nerve, the optic chiasma, the optic tract. And what are they on both sides? This is the interior perforated substance on the base of the brain, right? This is the pituitary gland or hypophysis cerebri, and these are the hypothalami, left and right. Okay, and let me mark, this is the oculomotor nerve, the 3rd cranial nerve. It is related to your midbrain. This is midbrain and this is the trochlear nerve, the fourth cranial nerve. Now again we enter into the pons and we have learned the abducens nerve, right, on its lower edge, the trigeminal nerve, and if I increase or zoom it out and show you the base, let me repeat, that was the facial nerve, the vestibulocochlear nerve. After that, the ninth, that is glossopharyngeal on both sides, and the vagus, the 10th nerve, and this is the accessory nerve which has got cranial part and of course the spinal part coming from the spinal cord C5 level and above. And what is this? Along with the lateral edges of the pyramids along the medulla oblongata, this is the 12th cranial nerve, the hypoglossal nerve, right? Okay, another important thing, that as we see in the very center the basilar sulcus, and on both sides what we observe, the transverse running ridges on the anterior aspect of the pons, right? And we will learn that how it is formed. Another important thing that we have several times heard about, the corticopontine fibers, right? And how they come. This is the cerebral cortex, right? No matter what part it has, these are coming towards the pons and they are forming the corticopontine fibers. And let me show you another thing. We will study them internally, but before that you should have the concept. In the very center, on both sides, there are so many pontine nuclei, right? So these cortical fibers, let me mark, these are coming, and after entering into the pons they have to crisscross, right, like this, and after that they have to enter into the cerebellum through the middle cerebellar peduncle, right? So they make the cortico-pontocerebellar pathway, right? Let me mark it, that this is the pontine region through cortico-pontine fibers and enter into the cerebellum, so called as cortico-pontocerebellar fibers, right? Like this.